Hi friends, thank you for taking time out of your week to spend a little with me. I appreciate you. This week I'm sharing another viewer suggestion. This one comes from John, so thank you. The case we're going to discuss is the kidnapping and murder of Larry Wayne Thomas. As always, I invite you to join me as we remember Larry. Larry Wayne Thomas was born on May 22, 1951 in Jefferson County, Alabama, to parents Bernard and Dora Thomas. He was the older brother to two sisters, Patricia and Dorothy. At the time, Larry was 11 years old and in the 5th grade. He had a love for baseball, even playing in the Little League in Midfield, Alabama as a catcher. Midfield, Alabama is located in Jefferson County and is a small community. As of a 2010 census, the population sat at 5,300 residents. At the time of Larry's childhood, it seemed to be that picturesque American town where everyone knew everyone and children played in the streets free of worry, until Larry went missing. On August 2, 1962, like any other week, Larry attended a Little League game at the local baseball field, except when the game was over, he didn't return home. No one would have a clue what happened to Larry until the following day. After the game, Larry's friend Kim Canady returned home nearly an hour and a half later than usual. Confused and concerned, his parents asked where their son had been. With worry in his eyes, he told his parents that Larry was gone. Per Kim, he and Larry left the game after it ended and decided to stop by the playground at Midfield Elementary School to play on the monkey bars. While the boys were playing, a man he described as being in his late 20s or early 30s approached them and inquired about Ronald Collins, another boy they knew. The man claimed he was Ronald's uncle and was waiting for him to finish the game so he could take him home. He then invited both Larry and Kim to come with him to have a soda while he waited for Ronald, and the boys agreed. They followed the man to his car, described as a 1949 to 1952 dark-colored Chevrolet. Once the journey was underway, the driver made the comment that he knew they could buy king-sized colas for a nickel at Elizabeth's drugstore in the nearby town of Fairfield, Alabama, so he headed there. When they arrived, the man asked Kim to go into the store and buy the drinks while he and Larry would circle around the block. Kim told his parents he didn't understand why he felt the need to drive around until he returned, since there was plenty of parking by the store. But he followed the man's instructions. As he headed inside, he realized he didn't know what he was buying, so he turned around to ask the man, and he replied, "Whatever you like," before driving off. Kim returned and waited outside of the store with his purchases, but there was no sign of the car. He waited for a while before realizing they had left without him. He decided to take what little change he had left to the payphone to call home, but was unsuccessful due to dialing the wrong number. With no other options, he started walking home, a journey that took him an hour and 20 minutes to complete. When Kim finished his story, his parents immediately called the police. Chief Jay Morris arrived the next day to take Kim's report. Word spread quickly of the missing boy. Newspapers had his story posted on all of the front pages. The kidnapping of 11-year-old Larry sent shockwaves of panic through the small town, with parents barring their children from playing outside. During the 6-day search for Larry, little was discovered regarding the strange man he was last seen with. His parents were worried about their son, with his mother borderline hysterical. They hoped for the best, but expected the worst. By the end of the week, Larry was known throughout the state of Alabama. Because of the widespread publicity, Midfield authorities got a lead. During the morning hours of August 6, 1962, a woman by the name of Minnie Daly called the Oneonta Police Chief P.N. Handy to report a missing person. Mrs. Daly was the mother to Edward Daly, a 20-year-old deaf-mute man who was employed at Workman's barber shop. Mrs. Daly explained her son returned home to report his boss, George Workman, was gone, and had no plans of coming back. Edward discovered 3 notes written on counter checks, all addressed to him, but unsigned. Chief Handy knew of George Workman. He moved to Oneonta about a year prior. He described him as a good old boy who just kept to himself. Others shared similar sentiments of his behavior. Chief Handy decided to start his investigation at the barber shop. The shop was small and dingy, described as ominous with a handmade cardboard sign advertising haircuts for 75 cents and a special for young boys, 50-cent haircuts only on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursdays. The whitewashed building was very unassuming, and Chief Handy got to work. He first noticed around the back of the building was a vehicle identified as George Workman's, a car later discovered to match the description of the one used in the abduction. Inside of the shop, he located 3 notes described by the dailies. One asked Edward to either keep or sell his barber tools since he was leaving and wouldn't be back. One warned him of a loaded gun in the wastebasket, and lastly, one asked Edward to pray for him. The gun mentioned was where George indicated. It had 1 empty shell in the cylinder. During questioning of nearby shopkeepers and residents, Chief Handy discovered that on August 4, 1962, 2 days after Larry was abducted, George started inquiring about the city's out-of-town bus schedules. Allegedly, he wanted this information to post in his barber shop, but again, it seemed too much of a coincidence. After pulling what evidence he could, Chief Handy decided to make a quick stop out to Workman's home in the woods. George built a crudely fashioned cabin about 1.5 miles southeast of Lake Highland on Straight Mountain. It was a 2-bedroom flat roof abode closely resembling a concrete shack, located 200 feet off a winding dirt road. When the chief arrived, he suspected he wouldn't find George but wanted to give the property a once-over, where initially nothing was found. By 5:45 p.m., Chief Handy, who was already in contact with Chief Morris from Midfield, were able to obtain a search warrant on George's property. Officers from both Aniana and Midfield were brought in to search the cabin and surrounding area. All of those involved in the search described the cabin as the filthiest hog pen they'd ever seen. With the help of 2 officers and a pair of shovels, the mystery of Larry Thomas finally came to a conclusion. After several hours of searching and digging, a child's body was discovered wrapped in a blanket. Some newspapers reported his body was found behind an unfinished wall of the shack, while others stated he was buried in the corner of a trench outside of the cabin. The blanket was discovered to be soaked in creosote, a chemical used to preserve wood, and sawdust, assumed to speed up decomposition. Coroner Bill Lemley was called in to determine cause of death. Larry appeared to have suffered multiple knife wounds before ultimately being shot by his left eye with a .22 caliber bullet. Larry's body was badly decomposed that a typical identification could not be performed. A dentist from Bessemer was brought in to compare Larry's dental records, where a positive identification was made. 11-year-old Larry Thomas was found. When his family was informed of the news, his father replied that he knew all along he wouldn't see Larry again. He also commented that his wife, who was so in shock, just stared into space and was an empty shell. With Larry's discovery, a big question was left unanswered. Where was George Workman? Thankfully, both Larry's family and authorities wouldn't have to wait long to find out. The case took an unexpected turn when a 28-year-old man turned himself into the FBI office in Baltimore, Maryland on August 7, 1962. This man told the agent on duty that he'd killed a boy in Alabama. He wanted to get it off his chest. He wanted to turn himself in on August 5th, but didn't due to the fear of facing trial in Alabama. The agent didn't know about a murdered child in Alabama, and no warrant existed, so he reached out to the Midfield police, where he confirmed they had a suspect in custody. When they asked if he was George Workman, they replied, "We don't have George. We have a man by the name of Michael Mayola." During questioning with the FBI, Michael admitted for the last 16 months he was living a lie in the city of Aniana, Alabama. He worked under the alias George Workman as a barber, and no one knew he wasn't who he said he was. During a background screening, it was presumed that Michael chose to use an alias to start over. In 1955, Michael was charged with assaulting a child in Baltimore. For this crime, he served just 10 months of a 2-year sentence. Then, just 5 years later in Long Beach, California, he was arrested again for the same charge, but given a much lighter sentence. In reference to his California crimes, Michael pled guilty to his crime, which was reduced to disorderly conduct. He was given the choice of a $105 fine or 10 days in jail. When asked about Larry's murder, Michael provided a series of events that mirrored that of witness Kim Cannaday. On August 2, 1962, Michael admitted he attended a boys' baseball session as a spectator. When he noticed two boys head off from the ball field alone, he decided to follow them. He approached the boys with a fake story about being one of the other players' uncle and offered to take the boys to the store for sodas, and they all left together. He stated he strategically sent Kim inside of the store, stating he was a little bigger than Larry and knew he would be harder to handle. Once Kim was inside, he drove off, taking Larry to his home in the woods. Inside of his shack, Michael stated he assaulted Larry, despite his autopsy not confirming this detail. He also indicated he cut the boy with a knife in numerous spots before he fell asleep. Michael admitted he also fell asleep, but woke up several times unsure of what his next step would be. By the morning, Michael came to the conclusion his only option was to murder Larry. While Larry slept, Michael took his .22 caliber revolver and shot him near his eye to make his death less painful. After ensuring he was gone, he wrapped Larry's body up, covered him in chemicals, and buried him away in hopes that he would never be found. Michael then knew he had to leave town, so he boarded a Birmingham-bound weekend bus in Oneonta at 1:15 a.m. on Monday, August 5, 1962. From there, he went to Baltimore, where he arrived early the next morning to turn himself in to the FBI. After his confession, the FBI held him on the charges of unlawful interstate flight to avoid prosecution for kidnap and murder, until Alabama could issue their warrant. With the paperwork in place, Michael was extradited from Maryland to Alabama. Alabama authorities had to drive to Maryland to retrieve him, and at the time air conditioning wasn't common in most vehicles. With it being in the middle of the summer, temperatures in the South were sweltering, so to make this situation a little more comfortable for those involved in the transport, Birmingham News had the reporter Tom Langford deputized so his car could be used. Being deputized allowed Tom to accompany officers during Michael's escort, which gave the Birmingham News a direct outlet to the biggest news coverage at the time. During the ride back, the reporter questioned Michael about the crime, which he was given detailed stories and direct quotes. But more notably, it allowed for the public to learn who Michael Maiola was. Michael was born in D.C., where he claimed his father still lived. Growing up was a fairly normal childhood. His father married his stepmother, and together they had his half-brothers and sisters. He stated he wasn't close to them since his family considered him an outcast. After graduating from high school, he joined the Army in 1952, but shortly went AWOL and was discharged. During this period after was when he gained his 2 charges and spent time in jail in both Maryland and California. Once his legal troubles were clear, Michael left California and attended barber school at Fort Union Military School in Central Virginia, and upon graduation moved to Alabama. He claimed his move had no specific reason, just somewhere he would be unnoticed. He rented a building at the corner of First Street, and for a time lived in the shed behind the building until his shack in the woods was complete. Michael's candid interviews did little to spare him in the public eye. When the news of his previous crimes were released alongside candid shots of him smiling during his journey back to Alabama, seemed to only add fuel to the already raging fire. The citizens of Midfield and surrounding towns alike were outraged that such a criminal could be allowed to live amongst their communities. It became such an issue that Michael's anticipated arrival drew large crowds outside of the courthouse primed with pitchforks and torches to deliver their own form of justice. Originally, he was set to arrive during the evening of Sunday, August 12, 1962. But due to the crowds waiting, he was temporarily detained in several jails for nights for his safety, before finally reaching his destination of Oneonta on August 15, 1962. Michael sat in jail waiting for his day in court, which came on November 12, 1962, where Michael entered a plea of not guilty due to reason of insanity. The jury deliberated for 9 hours before delivering the verdict of guilty on November 15, 1962. He was sentenced to life in prison for the first-degree murder of Larry Thomas. After the verdict was read, Larry's mother ran to the bench and screamed at the jury, asking how could you give him life and not the chair. The jury foreman replied he did all he could for her boy. Michael Maiola was taken to the Eastern Lane Correctional Facility where he still sits today. As of 2016, Michael earned the title of being the longest continuously serving inmate in the state of Alabama. He became known amongst the prison population for sharing his Catholic faith, being described as a walking Catholic encyclopedia. In January of 2021, Michael came up for parole, where District Attorney Pamela Casey campaigned urging the public to write letters to the parole board to object his release, asking them to never forget the victims, never forget Larry. Her efforts paid off with hundreds of letters received, and on January 21, 2021, Michael was denied parole. Michael will be eligible for parole again in January of 2026, where he will be 93 years old. Larry was buried on August 9, 1962 in Valhalla Cemetery in Midfield, Alabama. As a memorial for the little boy who loved baseball, a field was named in his honor. Many have stated the field also serves as a reminder of the crimes against their community, all those decades ago. However, those who lived through that time don't need to be reminded. The monstrous acts of Michael not only took a child from a family, but the innocence of all children, since they no longer played outside, and those who did constantly looked over their shoulders. Neither the children or their parents felt safe anymore. Michael Mayola forever changed the lives of their once secure community. Hi friends, if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. As always, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about the case, so leave them below and we can chat about this. If you found this to be informative, please consider giving the video a thumbs up to let YouTube know you want more from me. And lastly, if you have not yet, you should subscribe because we would love to have you under the ash tree. Thank you again, John, for sharing this case with all of us. I appreciate each and every one of you who continue to spend your time with me. It means the most. I hope you all have a week as amazing as you are, but for now, I have to say goodbye. So stay safe out there, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye, friends!